Well, then we come to the second commandment, which is like the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, it's the same kind of thing. You love your neighbor as yourself in much the same way. You think your feelings towards other people are good, positive, faithful, loving feelings towards other people. And your feelings towards yourself are good, positive, loving feelings towards yourself. You see, loving yourself and loving your neighbor in a good, positive way, thinking good of other people, speaking well of other people, speaking well of yourself. There's so many people that will not forgive themselves for things that they've done wrong. And even myself, when I was first doing the love list, it was hard for me to say to God that I loved him. Why was it hard for me to say that I loved God? The reason it was hard for me to say that I loved God was because the devil had put anger into my heart for all the bad things that were happening into my life that were not God's fault. They were the devil's fault, but the devil was blaming God, and I was believing, and I was angry with God. So I had to get all that anger out of me for God, and then it became easier to tell God that I love him. Now I tell God I love him all the time. I love him when I go to bed. I love him when I get up in the morning. I love him through the day, and repeating that love list is a very important part of having that full-time love of God, so that you have it with you all the time. You think it, you say it, you feel it. You feel it, you think it, you say it. It doesn't matter where it starts, whether it starts in the heart or whether it starts in the head, as long as you're doing it all. And then being filled with the love of God. Why am I doing this? Why am I giving these? Because I love God, and he loves me. And that's why I'm doing this. Okay? That's what it's all about, right? And then love your neighbor as yourself, same thing. Think positively of yourself, of other people, feel good about other people, and so on. Okay, and I know when I talked about commandments, the Ten Commandments are there to teach us how to love God and how to love our neighbor, or at least the first principles of loving God. You cannot love God with all your heart if you love other gods. If you put other people or things to the same position or greater than the true and living God, you see, you don't love God with all your heart. In fact, God even said if you have graven images of other gods, that you actually hate him. All right? You got to get rid of the idols of your life. This is how we love God, right? Not using his name in vain. We speak well of God. We use his name properly. And you have a Sabbath holy to have relationship with God. You see, it's by keeping those commandments that we learn to love God with all our heart. And it's the same thing with the commandments that teach us how to love our neighbors ourselves. First of all, honoring your father and your mother. Love begins in the home. Your parents love you, you love your parents, and love begins in the home, right? You don't kill people. Killing is an act of hatred, an act of anger, all right? You don't steal another man's wife, okay? You don't steal. You don't lie to people. You don't covet. You see, these commandments teach us how to love our neighbor as ourselves. We have a principle of law that says that your rights extend to the point in which they infringe upon the rights of other people. You see, you have a right to life until that point in time that you violate somebody else's right to life. You see, you want to live, they want to live, you let other people live. Okay. So these are the two great commandments, okay? So then Jesus put a question to the Pharisees about the Christ. They didn't necessarily believe that Jesus was the Christ, but he asked him, he said, when the Christ comes, whose son will he be? Well, he'll be a son of David. So somebody that can prove their lineage back to David. Well, there were a lot of people that could prove their lineage back to David. That was not the big deal. But then, how great is this Messiah? You see? And so this is... So this next question is a very important question, because about David called his son Lord. Okay, the Messiah is going to come to the lineage of David, but David is calling that Messiah Lord. How is that possible? How can the son of David be Lord to David, be greater than David? Okay. If David called him Lord, how is he his son? You see? All right. So then no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. Okay. Well, they weren't willing to commit to the idea that maybe this Messiah was going to be more than just a regular man. Okay. So Jesus then begins to pronounce woes upon the Pharisees, and this is an important chapter, and I don't think I'm going to get through it all today. And here we have the relationship between. It talks about the relationship between the people and the leaders. Okay, we've already talked about how leadership, they get into leadership positions to exercise authority over people. Okay, and I can relate to this because I grew up in a church where I was taught to love and sustain and respect the leaders of my church, not knowing that they had already sold out to the great and abominable church. I didn't know that at the time. Okay, and Jesus knew the corruption of the leaders in his day. He knew the things that they were involved in. He knew where they came from. He knew who their true pacts were with, you see. And so how are the people supposed to relate to these people that are in leadership position? And Jesus says, because they sit in Moses' chair or Moses' seat, whatever, do as they say, but don't let your works become like theirs. Because they say good things, but they don't do good things. Like I've been talking about up to this point in time, about how there's a lot of the religious community that they don't live it, they don't do it, and they don't live it, and they don't actually teach it. All right? And so, but what they say that is good to do, then go you and do the same thing. So what kinds of things were they doing? Well, they were binding heavy burdens on people and, getting them to do things that they wouldn't do themselves. Slave drivers, right? And they do things to be seen of men. They wear their fine, fancy clothes to be seen of men, and they do their works of righteousness to be seen of men. Okay, that goes on today, right? They love to sit up, you go into church and all these religious people are sitting up in the stands. They've got the great big old high pulpits and stuff like that. They love the high places and the high seats and the feasts and in the marketplace and in the, like they go someplace and they expect it to be invited up to the front. That kind of stuff. And then they make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. Once again, this is putting on an outward show. A phylactery are these little boxes that they carried on their heads or on their arms that carried the commandments with them. So like if by having them, it made them look more righteous, and the bigger it was, the more righteous they supposedly were. It's all about show, right? And they love to be called rabbi. Oh, master.